This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Cherished Companions with Doug Wilber from, um, Doug, we just talked about what you want to talk about today. And
Right.
let me tell you, after having an injury, I realized that my family was at a loss. They were at a loss because I just do everything. Okay.
Mhm.
Half the things in this house, my husband doesn't even know where they are because he didn't have to know. Um,
Right.
but we quickly, especially me, created a plan with them and said, these are the things I'm going to need initially. We'll find out if I need anything else in the future. But in the meantime, I'm going to explain to you how you can do some of the chores that I've done for the last 41 years. And it did not come with any complaints from him. It was
Right.
it's
Right.
like, well, it's about time. So
Mhm.
I think sometimes we, as we get older, we assume that our family um, knows how to do the things if we can't. But the reality of it is they probably don't. So how do we plan for the future?
Well, yeah, one of the things that uh, so often happens is that people will kind of fall into roles, and you were kind of describing that where you fall into a role, and the role is you're you're the take care of everything person. So usually that take care of everything person um, is when something happens to a loved one is the one who's oftentimes taking care of everything, and it just you fall back into that role. And the problem is that you then get burnout, with a situation like that. And that's why I think in order to avoid burnout, or if burnout has happened already, how to mitigate the issues around burnout um, is really about creating a family plan, and as really a means to share responsibility and to avoid that eventual
Sure.
possibility of a burnout. So I hope in this episode we're going to be able to provide families with kind of a step-by-step guide to structuring a clear, effective home care plan. And that way you can kind of share things fairly, prevent burnout for that person that takes things on, and hopefully have some sanity, in this situation. So so that's kind of what I hope we can do. Now, one of the things is that I think people need to understand is that over 40 million Americans right now are providing unpaid caregiving for a family loved one, and nearly 60% of them report feeling overwhelmed. And that's a pretty darn big
It
number.
is. Yep.
And um, the real thing is, can we balance that out? Can we create some sort of balance between caregiving, work, personal life, and other things for families? And I think there's a way to do it. But you basically have to assess the care needs. You have to define and divide responsibilities fairly, so it doesn't land on one person. And then we have to kind of figure out how to prevent that caregiver burnout. And if we're able to, explore those topics, maybe we can provide the solutions
Right.
for folks. So, um, one of the things I think it's important to figure out is, and you kind of hit on this, like your situation happened suddenly,
Right.
right? And so what happens to families when they don't have a plan, when they don't have anything set out? Well, it's as I mentioned, it defaults more often to one than not to one person. Um, and that leads to stress, and it certainly leads to resentment in almost all situations. And
Exactly.
um, the and then the second thing, and again, you hit on this perfectly, which is important tasks oftentimes fall through the crack. And in the case of an older person, hopefully not in your case, things like medication mismanagement happens, missed appointments, the things that aren't little
Right.
can oftentimes, happen because it's like, who's responsible for it? And then, unfortunately, the other issue is that family will oftentimes kind of I wouldn't say disintegrate, although in the worst case situation they can.
Sure.
But there is definitely conflict that can happen. We're already talking an emotional situation because of whatever's gone on with mom or dad. But there's oftentimes these disputes that have happen over caregiver roles, and some people feel left out, others will feel overburdened, and again, definition makes a big difference in the situation. And then the financial strain from unexpected costs, and that can happen in many different ways. One way is that expenses can for the care itself can be a dispute.
Right.
But the other piece is, I ran into someone this last week, and she said, I have to work. You know, I have to, I have my own family.
Right.
I'm here with my mom, and I have my own things that I need to be doing. And she had basically uprooted her life because of trying to take care of her parent. And so, she's trying to juggle work. She's trying to juggle, being at home. She's trying to juggle, the feelings that she has for her mom. She's trying to juggle, things going on with her siblings. And, none of that is good,
Right. Exactly.
So, and I don't know, I know you had personal experience, but did you ever have any of that go on?
So my grandfather, my mother's father, came to live with us when I was 9 years old. And because he came to live with us, we had to move to a bigger house. Um, my parents at the time could not afford to move. So my mother's siblings said, "Oh, no problem. We'll give you the down payment and you can find a house." Well, from what I remember, the down payment was not significant even back in the 60s.
Right.
And my parents ended up getting a fixer-upper. And when we first moved in, my mother's siblings were very upset. How can you bring dad into this house? It was like, hey, I didn't have a choice. Plus,
Right.
I had a working mother and father back in the 60s. And my mother
Mm,
stopped working because she had to get her father situated. And the reason he came to live with us was everybody said, well, Dorothy, you have young kids yet. So this will be great for dad. And it was, except he needed a lot of help initially. And
right.
we were three young kids. We couldn't take care of him. Um, my mother used to say, you're going to go babysit him in his room while I make dinner. And I was 9 years old at the time. And it just sounded like really, this is great. I get to be a grown up. But what happened was that my mother finally had to sit down with her siblings and say, look at, you all still have a life. I love dad, but I can't take care of him.
Yeah.
And so he actually chose that he wanted to go to an assisted living. That was actually his choice because he had friends living there. And
No.
he said to the family, get me out of here. I don't want to be around three screaming young kids. I want to be with my friends. But for 2 years, I saw my parents struggling. I saw my mother not working, and she loved work. She wasn't going out with her friends. And even us as kids, we didn't get to do the things with our parents during those 2 years.
Yeah. Well, and life is a series of trade-offs, and so you had an opportunity to spend time with your grandfather you wouldn't
Right.
otherwise, and so there are some things that can compensate for that. Um, but I mean, I just doing a fixer. I've done fixer-up homes when my kids were young, and it is awful. I mean, I remember just the amount of work, and to do that, have young kids, have lowered income, and then have, someone that had care needs,
Right.
on top of that, it had to be a bit of a nightmare for your mom and dad,
Oh, it had to have been. I mean, luckily, I remember hearing about the struggles they went through. I didn't notice it. In fact, I thought my brothers and I were going through the struggles because when we would say, oh, it's a beautiful summer day, can we go to the beach? And my mother would say, no, because your aunt didn't come over to sit with your grandfather today. So
Right,
of course you get mad at your aunt because she didn't show up. Um, and then you learn later in life, what those circumstances were.
right. Well, let's kind of break down maybe what a how to make a care plan. So the first thing is you need to assess the loved one's needs. You have to look at the medical needs and medication management, doctor's visits, therapies, all of those things kind of have to come into play. You need to look at in daily living needs, bathing, dressing, are those all involved? Eating, mobility assistance. Um, Household needs, cleaning, meal prep, who's going to be doing those things, grocery shopping, home safety. And then, obviously the social aspect or emotional aspect, preventing isolation, engaging in activities, mental health check-ins, things of that nature. So you basically have to create a needs assessment checklist. Once you've kind of gotten through that, then you have to identify strengths of the family members.
Right.
We kind of naturally fell into this. It was probably a little bit less systematic than the approach that I'm doing with our own family, but um, the dynamic our family lent to it and sort of proximity. So we sort of naturally ended up doing this as our family. So but it was basically you look at families availability, you look at skill sets, who's comfortable with handling personal care, who's good with finances, who is not good at finances, and who has flexible work hours to be able to maybe accommodate things at different times, financial considerations, um, and can some people help financially with supporting family members if instead of doing the direct care themselves. Looking into community resources. For example, Geauga County has hours that they provide for some seniors. Maybe you can get something like that for a parent. Sometimes there's volunteer groups that are faith-based, government assistance programs. There's a number of different resources that you need to look into. And then, you really have to hold a family meeting of some sort in order to discuss these roles, look at resources, piece it all together, and but the big thing is it needs to be and I know every family is different, but the more you can make it a team effort and where you can come to consensus, I think the more likely it is going to be that this will be successful.
Right.
And for that parent that they have, and the one thing that most families can agree on is that they love their parents, um, and feel a certain sense of responsibility for helping. And so it's now it comes down to how do we do this, and how do we divide it fairly, you know? And because as I mentioned before, oftentimes one person tends to get it. I will tell you that probably 80% of the time that's going to be a daughter.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
and not always, but most of the time it is a daughter that will take it on. Oftentimes it's the eldest daughter, but not always. And sometimes it's the youngest daughter, and sometimes it's the daughter in proximity. But it's more often than not falls on that one
Sure.
person. Um, and then essentially have to look at availability, the strengths, the proximity that we talked about before. And then you have to essentially um, kind of then put that person responsible for that task. So, one person is going to handle the medical appointments. They're going to manage the meal prep. Another will manage the meal prep, excuse me, do different things like that. Maybe one person is going to be involved in making schedules, so
Sure.
that it becomes, although the more you can lock in schedules and where people look at it like work, the better off you're going to be in those situations. Um, so, I have those weekly rotating shifts that then get planned out. And then, look at about financial contributions. How are we going to do this? And oftentimes, families have the parent has the resources. It's just drawing on those resources,
Right.
but sometimes not. Sometimes you have to handle it differently. And then, the other thing is looking at the professional. That's where we come in. You're going to look at it and you're going to say, yeah, we can do this, but we still have this whole huge area
Right.
that we need to get covered. And that's when you pull in the professional help. Or I'm not comfortable and no one's comfortable with personal care. And it may, there could be two reasons for that. Someone may not be comfortable with personal care because they've never done it and they just
Right.
need to learn how to do it. And there's ways that you can learn. But sometimes people, that's just not going to be your comfort level, and ever, and so you may have to delegate that, and that's where you have professional services that will come in. But the thing is that the you have to divide things also by just mere proximity. So one sibling may live nearby and provide, certain things. So in my family, um, you know, um, my two sisters lived out of town, and then I have two brothers that are in town. I was actually literally the closest to my mom when we started doing this. So I started doing a lot of the practical stuff. I'd go shopping. I'd pick up, things, bring it there, and I also was involved in the care management.
Sure.
One of my brothers took care of the financial ends of things. Then my sisters would come in for extended periods of time and they help with organization. And so it kind of worked in this beautiful, thing. And then it varied. It changed as times, changed as well. So that um, sometimes the financial thing can be handled by someone out of state because you don't have to be there, but it is going to require time,
Right.
and maybe that person has the ability to do it, and and that you don't have to actually be physically present for something like that. um, and then here's something that I think oftentimes people don't think about, and that is a communication system, that um, so that things don't get dropped. And so what I would recommend is weekly check-ins, about the care needs, what's changing, what's needed to be done. Using technology is important, sending text, Google Calendar, group messaging, for real-time updates. There's even different caregiver apps that are available, that can be involved. We have, for our company, a family room portal, which allows people to kind of come in and have access to schedules that we're involved in, so
Right.
everybody's seeing it in agreement and can communicate back and forth, can communicate with their care manager from the company. So this is where technology has made a big difference. Zoom calls, um, for family meetings can be great because you don't have to meet face to face in
Right.
person, you
Right.
know. Um, and then, you we should also probably associate or assign someone as being the care coordinator. And that can even be rotated, where you have a different care coordinator based on the month,
Sure.
So, Sally's going to take, January, and then James will take, February. And so I think the other thing is, after you get the communication system set up, you need to plan for emergencies. And having that in place. So and this is oftentimes where we can play a huge role. You get regular hours established with us, and if for some reason someone can't make it, and you realize that they get COVID and they're going to be out for 10 days,
Sure.
or they break something or injure something and can't do it for a while, having that established relationship with um, a company can really provide that balance that I think is required in order to fill in the gaps. But so you have to have backup caregivers, and frankly, you should even have backup caregivers if you have an agency in place. Because let's say you have the snowstorm of the century,
Right.
and everybody's stuck in their driveway. If you have someone that is in the neighborhood that would be able to come over, that's to the advantage of the individual, that you have something like that in place as a what if, and not as a regular thing, but what if the worst things were to happen, or someone were to get sick last minute, whether it be family or professionally. Making sure you get the emergency contacts, medical history, everything's stored and available. I always recommend, and we even provide for our folks, something that is put on the refrigerator for EMS that would have, a list of medications, big conditions that people are involved in, other things like that. I think even having a digital folder can be important, that is like a shared folder, for medical, legal documents, other things like that. I think, just having access to that, I think is very important. And I think having community, when I say community, like this group of
Right.
uh, uh, um, who are involved in this, having access to it, would prevent a lot of running around in some circumstances when you need the documents very quickly. So, the other thing is, and I had mentioned this before, is that whole idea of avoiding burnout. Um, and I don't know, did you ever have burnout when you were helping your mom?
Yeah, I did. But I realized it was my own fault because I had people around me. Okay. But I became that person that thought I had to do it all because I was supposedly the one in charge, which looking back, it meant I could assign other people.
Right.
So my
You can
boy,
delegate if you're in charge.
but I didn't. And my brother and my niece were always there to say to me, "You've got to go for a walk right now," or "Go take a hot shower," something to break it. And, the first couple of weeks I would fight them on it. But then I started to realize, you know what, I'm no good for my mom and the other caregivers if I'm sitting here feeling angry. And
Right, exactly.
uh, it took others to make me see it. And I think that sometimes is the problem for many caregivers, even professional caregivers.
Yeah,
They have this great relationship with the person they're caring for, and they feel like if you say to them, can you work an extra shift because somebody can't come? They say yes, but at the end of that shift, they're exhausted. And, you know, under their breath, they're saying, well, look at me, I work two shifts. You don't
right.
realize that you're burning yourself out.
Well, and that's, whenever you hear terms like what you would use that indicate irritableness, anger, overwhelmed, exhausted. Yeah, those all scream. It's like they might as well have neon lights
Yeah,
saying burnout ahead, or burnout present. The other thing is you find that people will neglect things that are important to them. It's not uncommon. I know I've said this before for someone to predecease the person they're caring for. And I mean, it's really, really common for that to happen because people start neglecting their own personal health.
right.
They're supposed to go to the doctor, they don't go to the doctors, and then all of a sudden, they have a stroke. And yeah, they aren't doing the things that they love, hobbies or relationships or going out to eat or other things because it's just happening. And even as a kind of emotionally distancing, when people start emotionally distancing, it may be from the person you're caring for because you're angry at that person, or it may even be, others around you where you're just kind of withdrawing. And, that's a sign, I think, of the anxiety that's being produced, of the depression, even, and kind of the stress that it's
Right.
putting on you. And if you're seeing that, then something needs to be done, sooner rather than later, you know. So, the what do you do in that situation? You need to schedule breaks. Literally, you have to schedule it in. And I just we're helping someone right now, and the wife is the primary, and she wanted to take a trip, a cruise with friends. And I was so glad that she did this because, it was the ability because she's spending a lot of time, in doing care and being able to get away. And she'll actually be a better caregiver in the end.
Sure.
But she had to schedule it. And then, we're coming in and we're helping, and, so, getting professional service or respite or shifts with other family members in order to be able to take that time. It just needs to be done, and I know there was a time where my mom was with me, and it was she actually was staying at my home, and it was just constant, and I love my mom, so it wasn't like I was angry at her, but it definitely felt like, um, and I don't want to use the term trapped, but I definitely felt restrained.
Right.
And so I would I had her go to brother or my sisters at times in order to do it, and so we were sharing the time, and it was important. I think it was nice because they were able to spend time, but
Sure.
it wasn't just all on me, to do it constantly. And if it had been, I would have definitely been burnt out, and I would kind of go to the point where, yeah, that's about, where I need to be, you know, and then be able to pass along, I think I think the other thing is that, you need support. And if you are involved in this, I think those who are involved need to get support groups. There are both online and in-person support group. I recommend the in-person if you can do it, but heck, online is fine if that's what you're able to do. And then stay involved in those hobbies, those activities, and doing the things that you know are important. So those who caregivers who end up um, prioritizing these things end up in the end being a much better caregiver, and that's what I was referring to before. I really felt like I was you know much much better at doing it.
Sure.
Um so if I were to encourage action steps, I would say if you're hearing this and you're living this, you need to somehow schedule a family meeting. And the action steps I would have for our listeners is do it this week. Don't put it off. You know, um, if you have to listen to this again and get those point by point things, but um, schedule that meeting and discuss these things. Discuss how you're feeling. You know, and don't do it in the one thing that I would say is so often others are oblivious to it. They don't know
Absolutely.
what you're going through. And so they're not purposely neglecting. You've assumed the role, and um, and and so sometimes they're just oblivious to it. They haven't lived that your experience, you know.
Yep.
So just help them to understand that, and then just at least identify one area where care responsibilities can be better shared. And you can do the whole thing, but at least one area, right away that you can share, and then look at local resources, look for caregiving support, and whether that be the Alzheimer's Association, their group meetings, whether it be organizations like Cherished Companions, where we can assist and help with, specific tasks and times that are there. And then, understand that there are all sorts of other things. I had mentioned there are apps. You can look into that. There are some financial aid available if someone's really tight. We've I think talked about some of that in some of our other episodes. VA benefits. Sometimes people have long-term care insurance, but I can almost always say that where there's a will, there's a way. And typically there is a way to um, make this happen in people's lives so that they can remain at home. And that would be the other thing is where you can remain where you are, remain at home. Because I have long said that people do better at home. And I would say at least 95% of the time, I believe that is the best option for most people. And usually, believe it or not, it's almost always a less expensive option. And especially if you share and you spread out the responsibilities that there are. So the final thought I want to leave with you is that caregiving is a team effort. It truly is, and no one should do this alone. No one should bear that responsibility by themselves. And there is a way to do it. Have your sanity, have a balance in life, and get through this because as it is, you know, it's hard um, to balance life in general.
Right.
But when you add those big stresses, it can really be a huge a, a huge obstacle that we need to overcome. And but with a plan, you can make a giant difference in how well this functions and how well this works. So I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
Well, the first thing I would really say to everybody is don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah,
And you know, maybe you don't belong to a church or a synagogue or a religious group, but there's got to be something in your community. Call and start asking. Talk to your neighbors because you're not the only one who's going through this. There's somebody else who has experienced this as well. And the
yeah,
other thing I would say is, and it took this, you know, accident breaking my shoulder to do this, but now my family definitely knows certain things that they can do if
yeah,
anything ever were to happen to me again. We've already had our wishes, discussed with our boys, but communication's important because if
right.
people don't know, um, it's just too easy to say, "Hey, we can't do this. We don't know how to do this," and I don't want to end up in a facility unless there's no other choice, and my boys know that. So, I want to stay at home like the majority of people want to stay at home, and
Yeah, and no matter what, sometimes people the piece that I would kind of add on to that is that you're going to be spending a certain amount of money if you put someone in a facility, and if the goal is to keep someone at home, and yeah, a thousand reasons why I think that's the best choice, but there's a lot that can be delegated professionally, and that truly is where we come in because we work as a team with the family, and we can take on a lot or we can take on a little, but we're part of an overall plan that the family is developing in order to keep someone um, functioning, thriving, hopefully in a really good way as they age. And there's our goal has always been to help people, and sometimes that requires a lot of help, and sometimes it requires just a little bit.
a little bit of help.
But I can tell you that that we, having that professional help in those professional resources, whether it's us or some of the other things I mentioned, is going to make this task a very much a doable task. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Well,
Well, it was a
thank you
great
for all
talk.
that information. That is, it's going to be helpful because we're all aging. So, we don't always have the privilege to know what to do unless we start thinking about it early on. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
good.
We'll
Sure.
talk to you
Thank you.
next month.
All
Take care.
right. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.